Ryan's Office Revenge. The day I found out my 20-year loyalty was worth $4.50, I decided to cost my manager a lot more than that. My name is Mason Cooper. I'm 47 years old. And until recently, I was a senior operations manager at Summit Industrial Technologies. For 2 decades, I'd watched that company grow from a small family operation into something I barely recognized. But that December morning, staring at a cheap coffee tumbler on my desk, everything became crystal clear. Brandon dropped it there like he was feeding scraps to a dog. "Great year, Mason," he said with that practiced corporate smile. "Thought you might need this to stay caffeinated through all those overtime shifts." The tumbler still had the price sticker on the bottom. $4.50. Inside, Brandon had scribbled in blue marker. "Thanks for keeping things running, Mason. No mention of our $28 million profit. No mention of the equipment rollout I'd managed that saved us $500,000 in downtime. Just a throwaway joke that smelled like the clearance section at Office Depot." I turned it over in my hands while Brandon stood there, arms folded, waiting for me to laugh it off like everyone else did. Instead, I just said thanks and set it down. He clapped my shoulder with that patronizing touch and walked away toward the glass offices where this year's record profits were already showing up as bonuses and company cars for the executive team. I stared at that tumbler for a long time. On the side, under our company logo, it said, "Celebrating our record year together." That word "together" stuck in my throat like a fishbone. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this point. When I started at Summit Industrial 20 years ago, we were 45 people in a converted warehouse on the south side of town. The Hendricks family owned it outright. Old man Henry and his 2 sons running heavy equipment manufacturing for local construction companies. Back then, recognition was simple. If the job got done right, you kept working. If you screwed up, Henry would walk over and tell you exactly what you'd done wrong. No HR department, no employee engagement surveys, just honest work for honest pay. Henry knew every employee's name, their kids' names, which ones were struggling with their mortgages. When Tommy Vasquez broke his leg on the job, Henry paid his full salary for 3 months and covered his medical bills without being asked. That was recognition. That was appreciation. Things started changing around my 12th year when Summit landed a contract with Morrison Construction. Suddenly we were supplying earth movers to 3 states. The orders got bigger, the deadlines tighter, the margins fatter. Henry brought in consultants who talked about scaling operations and optimizing human capital. The converted warehouse got renovated with real offices, security badges, and HR became a department instead of just Susan, who handled payroll and remembered everyone's birthday. That's when Brandon Matthews arrived. On paper, he looked perfect for the operations manager position they'd created above me. MBA from State, 8 years at a Fortune 500 manufacturing company, could speak fluent corporate. He came in talking about streamlining operational efficiency and implementing strategic workforce optimization protocols. Within 6 months, Brandon had figured out how Summit really worked. People like me, the ones who'd been there through the lean years, who knew which machines needed babying and which suppliers delivered on time, we made things happen. People like Brandon made PowerPoint presentations about things happening. He'd drift into our morning production meetings 10 minutes late, skim through the overnight reports I'd already analyzed, then repeat something I'd said earlier, but louder and with more hand gestures. Upper management ate it up. "Brandon's really taking charge of operations," they'd say. "Great strategic thinking." I didn't hate the guy. I just didn't respect him. He lived in spreadsheets and metrics, I lived in the real world, where hydraulic seals fail at the worst possible moment and delivery trucks break down on Friday afternoons. For years, that division worked fine. I kept the plant running smoothly. He kept the executives happy with his quarterly presentations and action plans. Then Summit got acquired by Titan Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in maximizing operational value through strategic restructuring. Translation: they bought companies, squeezed every dollar out of them, and sold the pieces. Suddenly, we had new buzzwords floating around: synergistic cost optimization, lean methodology implementation, performance-based recognition frameworks. Henry Hendricks retired with a golden parachute. His sons took consulting positions and moved to Florida. Pierce Morgan, Titan's appointed CEO, flew in from Chicago and immediately started talking about transforming company culture and modernizing employee engagement protocols. Recognition program rolled out with a glossy email full of stock photos showing diverse employees receiving wrapped gifts. Honoring your dedication. New milestone recognition initiative. The presentation at the next all-hands meeting showed sample items that looked impressive: engraved watches, leather portfolios, quality jackets with embroidered names. People seemed genuinely excited. After years of bare-bones operations, maybe the new ownership would actually invest in the workforce. I hit my 20th anniversary in March. 20 years of showing up early, staying late, training new hires, troubleshooting crises that could have shut down production for days. I got a templated email from Jessica in HR. Congratulations on reaching your milestone anniversary. We couldn't accomplish our mission without dedicated employees like you. No gift, no mention in the company newsletter, no certificate, nothing. I figured they were still rolling out the program, working through some administrative backlog. I was too busy managing our spring equipment installation to chase after recognition trinkets anyway. But this December morning, holding Brandon's 4.50's Tumbler, something clicked into place that I couldn't ignore anymore. Then Q4 numbers hit like a sledgehammer, and everything fell into perspective. You always know when a company's had a good year. Better coffee appears in the break rooms. Construction noise starts on the executive floor. Parking spots get reserved for Employee of the Month programs nobody remembers signing up for. At Summit, it was CEO Pierce standing on stage in the main production area, clicking through slides with the kind of grin that meant bonuses for some people. "Best year in company history," he announced to the assembled workforce. "Revenue up 34%, net profit $28 million. We did this together. And I want every one of you to know how much your dedication means to this organization." The crowd clapped politely. $28 million in profit was serious money for a mid-size operation like ours. I did quick math in my head. That was enough to give every employee a $70,000 bonus and still leave $2 million for operational improvements. The slide that came next killed that optimism fast. Cash bonuses deferred pending strategic reinvestment initiatives. Same corporate speak we'd heard 3 years running. Pierce gave the familiar speech about positioning for long-term growth, building sustainable value, investing in infrastructure instead of short-term payouts. Most people looked resigned. The old-timers had seen this dance before. But this time felt different, because the context was different. We weren't a struggling family business anymore. We were owned by a private equity firm that measured success in quarterly profit margins, and those margins were looking pretty healthy. However, Pierce continued with that practiced enthusiasm. "We are excited to announce enhanced employee recognition initiatives. Appreciation packages will be distributed to all staff this week. A tangible token of our gratitude for your outstanding performance." That token was the coffee tumbler sitting on my desk the next morning. Around me, my teammates were opening identical packages. Same tumblers, different variations of Brandon's handwritten jokes. Fuel for excellence. Thanks for the daily grind. Caffeine-powered success. A few people chuckled and stuck them on their desks next to family photos. Most just quietly slid them into drawers. I picked mine up and looked at that price sticker again. $4.50. Then I glanced at the wall-mounted monitor still cycling through yesterday's profit announcement. $28 million. The math bothered me like a splinter under a fingernail. I've got access to Summit's procurement system. Senior managers need visibility into equipment costs for budget planning and vendor management. During lunch break, I logged into the financial portal and navigated to the Employee Programs Cost Center. There it was, buried in a list of quarterly expenditures, employee recognition and milestones. Annual budget, $38,000. Below that, a recent vendor payment caught my attention. Premier Corporate Gifts, Q4. Invoice, 11 Sun to $200. Description: Executive appreciation packages and milestone recognition items. I leaned back in my chair. $11,200. We had about 380 employees on payroll. Simple division put that at roughly 29,050 sasons per person. But I was holding a $4.50 tumbler. I clicked deeper into the vendor management system, pulling up Premier Corporate Gifts profile. The company had been approved 8 months earlier as our full-service recognition solutions partner. Brandon's electronic signature was on the vendor approval form, along with his business justification. Streamlined procurement process for enhanced employee engagement initiatives. Something nagged at me about the vendor address. I'd heard Brandon mention living in Riverside Heights, the newer subdivision about 20 minutes east of the plant. I pulled up Premier Corporate Gifts business registration through the state database. Public information. Nothing underhanded about checking it. The registered address was 1247 Oakmont Drive, Riverside Heights. That seemed familiar for some reason I couldn't quite place. I minimized the procurement system and opened LinkedIn, searching for Brandon's profile. Under personal information, it listed his current residence. Different street, same subdivision. But there was something else. His brother Jordan Matthews was also connected on the platform. Jordan's profile showed him as a small business owner in Riverside Heights. I clicked on Jordan's profile. Self-employed since March. Business description as corporate gifts and promotional products. And there it was in his contact information. 1247 Oakmont Drive. The exact same address as Premier Corporate Gifts. I sat there staring at my screen, pieces clicking, together like machine parts falling into alignment. Brandon approves a vendor owned by his brother. Brandon signs off on an $11,200 invoice for executive packages. Brandon distributes $4.50 tumblers with handwritten notes. The missing $7,000 wasn't an accounting error. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife, Rachel. Reminder: spring tuition payment due, January 15th, $8,400. Can you confirm the bonus situation? Our son Trevor was a sophomore at State, studying mechanical engineering. Smart kid, good grades, but college costs what college costs. Rachel and I had been counting on my year-end bonus to cover spring semester without touching our emergency savings. We'd planned around that money because Brandon had assured everyone that performance-based compensation adjustments were coming after the fiscal year closed. Performance-based compensation. I looked at the tumbler again, then at the numbers on my screen. My performance had helped generate $28 million in profit. My recognition was worth $4.50. Brandon's brother had been paid $11,200 for executive packages that turned out to be discount promotional items. I opened a new spreadsheet and started documenting everything. Vendor registration dates, invoice amounts, product specifications, Brandon's approval signatures. The paper trail was all there in the company's own systems, scattered across different databases but perfectly traceable if you knew where to look. 20 years I'd been solving problems for this company, keeping production lines running, training new workers, staying late when equipment failed, coming in weekends when deliveries were behind schedule. I'd never asked for recognition before, never complained about being overlooked for promotions that went to people with better degrees and smoother presentation skills. But this wasn't about recognition anymore. This was about integrity. And the more I looked at the numbers, the clearer it became that someone had been playing games with money that should have gone to people who'd earned it. That night, I went home and spread everything out on the kitchen table. Purchase orders, vendor registrations, the Q4 financial summary, printouts of Premier Corporate Gifts business filing. Rachel came in around 10 and found me hunched over my laptop with a calculator and a stack of highlighted documents. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down a cup of coffee next to my mousepad. "Trying to figure out where our recognition budget actually went," I said, pointing to the spreadsheet I'd been building. "And why Brandon's brother got paid $11,000 for coffee mugs that cost $4.50 each." Rachel picked up the tumbler and read Brandon's note. Then she looked at the vendor invoice on my screen. Her background is in accounting. She used to do books for a small law firm before Trevor was born, so she understood the numbers immediately. "How much did this cost them per person?" she asked. "About $29, if you believe the invoice. $4.50 if you look at the actual products." I showed her the bulk pricing I'd found online. "The difference is about $9,000 that went somewhere other than employee appreciation." Rachel didn't tell me to drop it or worry about my job security. She just said, "If you're going to pull this thread, make sure you document everything properly, and be ready for pushback." I was ready. I'd spent 20 years solving mechanical problems by following evidence until I found the root cause. This wasn't different, just financial fraud instead of equipment failure. The next morning was our monthly department meeting. Pierce was there to discuss Q1 planning and review the year-end results. He ran through the same slides we'd seen before, emphasizing record performance and strategic positioning for continued growth. About halfway through, he shifted to company culture and employee engagement. "I want to emphasize that recognition matters deeply to this organization," he said, clicking to a slide showing stock photos of happy employees. "That's why we've invested significantly in our appreciation initiatives this year. We want every team member to feel valued for their contributions." I raised my hand. Pierce paused. He made a point of being accessible to floor-level input. "Question from the operations team," I said. "Absolutely. What's on your mind, Mason?" I stood up with the tumbler in one hand and a folder of printouts in the other. This wasn't theater, it was evidence presentation. I have a question about that appreciation investment and how it translates into what employees actually receive. Pierce nodded encouragingly. "Fair question. We put considerable thought into that program. I've been here 20 years, I said, keeping my voice conversational but clear enough for the whole room to hear. This is what I received to mark our record profit year." I held up the tumbler. "It retails for $4.50, but, according to our procurement records, we paid Premier Corporate Gifts $11,200 for executive appreciation packages in Q4. A murmur went through the room. Brandon, sitting 3 rows back, had gone very still. I continued without looking at him directly. That should work out to about $29 per employee. So my question is, when we talk about investing in appreciation, is this the intended outcome? Pierce's expression shifted. The practiced smile flickered as he processed what I was really asking. He took the tumbler when I handed it to him, reading Brandon's handwritten note, feeling the cheap plastic construction. "Thank you for raising that concern," he said carefully. "We absolutely take recognition seriously. If there's a discrepancy in the program delivery, we'll investigate it immediately." He tried to move on to the next agenda item, but the energy in the room had changed. People were whispering, looking at their own tumblers with new understanding. You could feel the question spreading. If this is what $11,000 buys, where did the money really go? After the meeting, Brandon intercepted me near the elevators. His usual confident swagger was replaced by something that looked like controlled panic. "What the hell was that about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice down but failing. "Just asking questions about budget allocation," I said. "Same kind of analysis I do for equipment purchases. You made me look incompetent in front of Pierce. I didn't mention your name. I just presented the numbers." Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. "You think you're clever? You think they actually care about some old-timer who's been pushing the same buttons for 20 years? You're nobody, Mason. You're a wrench turner who got lucky with a spreadsheet." That's when I knew the coffee tumbler was about to cost him a lot more than he'd expected. Because panic makes people say things that reveal who they really are. "Maybe," I said. "But I'm a nobody who knows how to read vendor invoices. And I'm wondering why Premier Corporate Gifts has the same address as your brother Jordan." Brandon's face went white. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. 48 hours later, I got an email I wasn't expecting. Internal review. Vendor management compliance. Attendees. CFO, Adrian Walsh. HR Director, Jessica Walsh. Compliance Officer, Sarah Morrison. Optional, Mason Cooper. I clicked accept. When I walked into that conference room, Brandon was already there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Around the table sat the company's financial leadership with folders full of documents and expressions that meant someone was in serious trouble. "Mason, thanks for joining us," Adrian said. "We appreciate you bringing these concerns to management's attention." Jessica slid a packet across the table. On top was the Q4 invoice I'd found. Below it were 8 months of similar invoices, all approved by Brandon, all from Premier Corporate Gifts. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "Can you walk us through how you discovered this discrepancy?" Adrian asked. And that's when I realized my 20 years of documentation habits and system access had just turned a $4 coffee tumbler into the most expensive mistake Brandon had ever made. I walked them through everything methodically. How I'd accessed the procurement system, cross-referenced vendor registrations, traced the business address to Jordan Matthews. I showed them the spreadsheet I'd built, the invoice discrepancies, the pattern of inflated billing over 8 months. Sarah Morrison, our compliance officer, opened another folder. "We've conducted our own analysis since your presentation yesterday," she said. "This isn't isolated to Q4. We found similar discrepancies going back 18 months, totaling approximately $23,000. She pulled out a document that made Brandon sink lower in his chair. Premier Corporate Gifts was registered 3 days after Brandon approved expanding our recognition budget from $22,000 to $38,000. The business license lists Jordan Matthews as sole proprietor, operating from his home address. Adrian leaned forward. "Brandon, can you explain the relationship between yourself and this vendor?" Brandon tried one last deflection. "Look, Jordan mentioned he was starting a promotional products business. When we needed a vendor, I thought we should support local small business. There's nothing illegal about that." "What's illegal," Sarah replied, "is approving inflated invoices from a family member's company while delivering substantially different products than what's billed. That's fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of our conflict of interest policies. Plus," Adrian added, checking his notes, "you never disclosed the family relationship in your vendor approval documentation. That's a separate policy violation. Brandon looked around the table desperately. This is ridiculous. You're destroying my career over some coffee mugs. Mason's just pissed because he didn't get a fancy watch for his anniversary. That's when I realized Brandon still didn't understand what he'd really done. This wasn't about recognition or appreciation. It was about trust. Brandon, I said quietly, you stole from people who trust you. Every dollar that went to your brother's fake invoices was money that could have gone to actual employee benefits, or training programs, or safety improvements. You took it because you thought nobody would notice. Sarah closed her folder. Brandon, we're going to need you to remain available while we complete our investigation. HR will be in touch about next steps. The meeting ended there. Brandon walked out looking like he'd aged 5 years in an hour. Justice in corporate America is usually procedural, not dramatic. Over the next week, Brandon's name quietly disappeared from approval lists, email distributions, the company org chart. He still came in, still tried to act like everything was normal, but you could feel the institutional machinery grinding him out of the system. On Friday at 9:15 a.m., I was getting coffee in the break room when I saw him walking through the lobby carrying a small cardboard box. The security guard, who usually waved everyone through, stopped him at the turnstiles. Brandon, can you come with me for a moment? He asked. 20 minutes later, company-wide email. Effective immediately, Brandon Matthews is no longer with Summit Industrial Technologies. We thank him for his contributions and wish him success in his future endeavors. No mention of why. There never is. 3 weeks after that, Jessica called me into her office. She had a folder and an expression that looked like someone who'd been doing some serious thinking. We didn't handle this well, she said straight out. You shouldn't have had to become a forensic accountant to get basic accountability. She slid a document across her desk. Not a plaque or a certificate. A compensation adjustment package. Back pay for milestone recognition that never happened. A salary increase reflecting my actual contributions to operations. A retention bonus acknowledging 20 years of institutional knowledge. And a one-time payment labeled Recognition Program Reconciliation, my share of what the recognition budget should have delivered. This doesn't obligate you to stay, she said carefully. But it's our acknowledgement of what should have happened all along. I looked at the numbers. Real money that finally reflected 2 decades of keeping things running while other people took credit. 6 months later, I put in my notice. Not dramatically, just professionally. 2 weeks, complete handover, proper documentation for my replacement. My next position was with a smaller manufacturing company where experience mattered more than PowerPoint presentations. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk while teammates stopped by to say goodbye. Thanks for what you did, one of the younger guys said. That took guts, I shrugged. Anyone with system access could have seen the same numbers. Yeah, he said, but you're the one who didn't pretend not to notice. Walking to the parking lot for the last time, I left a small package with the receptionist for Pierce. Inside was a proper coffee mug, heavy ceramic, simple design, no logos or jokes. On the attached card, I'd written, "Appreciation costs more than $4.50. So does losing the people who make your record years possible." Standing beside my truck, keys in hand, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. That Tumbler had never been the real insult. It was the translator. It took everything Brandon and his type had been telling me wordlessly for years about what my experience was worth and put it into something I couldn't ignore anymore. The investigation uncovered that Premier Corporate Gifts had delivered roughly $8,000 worth of cheap promotional items while billing Summit $23,000 for premium packages. The difference funded Jordan's down payment on a new truck. When you follow the money in workplace fraud, It always leads to someone's personal benefit disguised as business necessity. Sometimes the smallest lies reveal the biggest truths about where you really stand. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's making sure the next person doesn't get played the same way.